Lightning split the Wyoming sky like a wound, and Sawyer Hale found her sprawled in the mud, a woman in a ruined silk dress, clutching a trunk full of broken promises, abandoned by a man who never intended to come. She should have died in that storm. He should have left her there. But sometimes the worst decisions we make are the ones that save us. If you want to know how a desperate rescue during one deadly night became something neither of them expected, stay until the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The storm hit Wyoming territory like punishment. Sawyer Hale had seen bad weather before. 29 years of frontier living taught a man to read the sky, to know when to get the horses inside and latch the barn doors twice. But this was different. This was the kind of storm that killed livestock, tore roofs off cabins, and drowned creeks into rivers overnight. The kind that made even stubborn men pray. He wasn't praying. He was riding. The gray mare beneath him fought every step, nostrils flaring wide as rain hammered down in sheets so thick Sawyer could barely see past her ears. His hat had stopped being useful 10 minutes ago. Water poured off the brim in streams, soaking through his coat, his shirt, running cold down his spine. His hands ached from gripping the reins. "Almost there, girl," he muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was lying. The fence line should have been close, half a mile from his cabin, maybe less. But in weather like this, distance meant nothing. Visibility was maybe 20 feet on a good guess. Lightning cracked overhead, bright enough to burn spots into his vision, and thunder followed so close it rattled in his chest. He should turn back. Common sense said turn back, get inside, wait it out. Whatever fence repair he'd planned could wait until morning. No point dying over a broken post. But Sawyer Hale didn't have much use for common sense when it came to his land. This homestead was all he had, 160 acres of rough Wyoming dirt that he'd broken his back proving up on for the past 3 years. Every fence post, every cleared field, every stone pulled from the soil was his. The government said so. The land office said so. But out here, paper didn't mean much. What mattered was the work. What mattered was not giving the land a single reason to take back what he'd earned. So he rode. The mare stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. Sawyer pulled her up, squinting through the rain. Something was wrong. The ground here should have been flat. He knew this stretch, had ridden it 100 times. But the mare was struggling like she was climbing. He swung down from the saddle, boots sinking immediately into mud that grabbed at his heels. The rain was deafening. He kept one hand on the mare's neck, using her bulk to block some of the wind, and moved forward carefully. The road was gone. Not gone entirely, but washed out in places, turned into a confusion of pooling water and deep ruts that looked like they'd swallow a wagon whole. Sawyer swore under his breath. This was the main route into town, barely a road on good days, but now it was damn near impassable. He was about to turn back, lead the mare around the worst of it, when lightning flashed again. And he saw her, just for a second, a shape that didn't belong, crumpled at the edge of the flooded road like something thrown away. Dark fabric, pale skin, the curve of a shoulder. Thunder swallowed the world, and when his vision cleared, there was only darkness and rain. Sawyer stood frozen, water running into his eyes. Maybe he'd imagined it. The storm playing tricks, shadows, and mud forming shapes that looked like... The lightning came again. She was real. A woman, lying half in the road, half out of it, one arm flung across something large and dark. A trunk, maybe. Her dress was plastered to her body, hair spread around her head in a tangle of wet silk. She wasn't moving. Jesus Christ. Sawyer was running before he realized it, dragging the mare behind him, his boots slipping in the mud. He dropped to his knees beside her, hands already reaching, checking for breathing, for a pulse, for anything that said she wasn't already dead. Her skin was cold. Too cold. But her chest moved. Shallow, barely there, but moving. "Hey." He gripped her shoulder, shook gently. "Hey, can you hear me?" Nothing. He shook harder. "Wake up. Come on, wake up." Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Rain pounded against her face, and she didn't even flinch. Sawyer looked around, wild, like someone might appear out of the storm with answers. But there was nothing. No wagon, no horse, no sign of how she'd gotten here or why. Just her and that trunk, abandoned in the middle of nowhere during the worst storm he'd seen in 5 years. Damn it. He couldn't leave her, even if he wanted to. And some part of him, the part that had learned the hard way not to trust people, not to let strangers into his life, definitely wanted to. He couldn't. She'd be dead by morning, maybe sooner. Sawyer slid his arms under her knees and shoulders, grunting as he lifted. She was heavier than she looked, dead weight and soaked through. Her head lolled against his chest, and he could feel how cold she was even through his wet coat. Getting her onto the horse was harder. The mare danced sideways, spooked by the extra weight and the smell of fear. Sawyer held the woman with one arm, grabbed the saddle horn with the other, and pulled himself up through sheer stubbornness. She slumped forward against him, and he wrapped his free arm around her waist to keep her from sliding off. The trunk. He looked back at it, sitting in the mud like a monument to whatever disaster had left her here. It was too big to carry, too heavy to lift one-handed. But something about it, the way her arm had been stretched across it, even unconscious, made him think it mattered. "Stay," he told the mare, like she had a choice. He slid down, handed the woman's weight to the saddle, and grabbed the trunk's handle. It was heavier than it looked, waterlogged and solid. He half dragged, half carried it to the mare and lashed it across the back with his rope, working fast, fingers clumsy with cold. Then he mounted again, pulled the woman back against his chest, and turned the mare toward home. The ride back was a nightmare. The woman stayed unconscious, her breathing so shallow, Sawyer kept checking to make sure she was still alive. The mare fought him the whole way, exhausted and overwhelmed, and twice Sawyer thought they'd go down in the mud, and that would be the end of all three of them. But his cabin appeared through the rain like a miracle. Small, rough-timbered, smoke rising from the chimney because he'd had the sense to bank the fire before leaving. He'd never been so grateful for anything in his life. He got the mare into the lean-to behind the cabin, stripped her saddle, and rubbed her down as fast as he could with shaking hands. The trunk he left outside the door, it could wait. The woman couldn't. Inside the cabin was warm, not comfortable, not by any civilized standard, but warm and dry, and a hell of a lot better than the storm. Sawyer kicked the door shut, carried the woman to the bed, the only bed, his bed, and laid her down on the rough wool blankets. She looked worse in the firelight. Her dress was torn, caked with mud, and her face was so pale it looked gray. Her lips had a blue tint that made Sawyer's stomach drop. He'd seen hypothermia before. She was close. "All right," he said, to himself more than her. "All right, we're fixing this." He stripped off his own coat and hat, tossed them aside, and went to work. The dress had about 1,000 buttons down the back, all of them tiny and half of them missing. Sawyer swore, fumbled with them, finally gave up and grabbed his knife. The fabric parted under the blade, and he peeled it off her like skinning an animal, quick, efficient, trying not to think about the fact that he was undressing a complete stranger. Underneath, she wore a corset, a chemise, layers of soaked undergarments that clung to her skin. He cut through those too, working fast, until she was down to nothing. He didn't look, not more than he had to. This wasn't about propriety or modesty. It was about survival, and survival didn't care about decency. He wrapped her in every dry blanket he owned, piled them on until she looked like a cocoon, then dragged the bed closer to the fire. Heat was what she needed. Heat and time. Her breathing didn't change. Sawyer sat down hard in the chair beside the bed, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. His shoulders ached. His hands were shaking from cold, from adrenaline. He wasn't sure. He scrubbed them over his face and tried to think. Who was she? What was she doing out there? And where the hell was whoever had left her? The questions circled in his head, unanswerable. He looked at her face, trying to find some clue. She was young, mid-20s maybe, pretty in a refined way that didn't belong anywhere near Wyoming territory. Her hands, resting on top of the blankets, were soft. No calluses, no scars. The hands of someone who'd never worked a day in her life. "What the hell were you doing out there?" he asked aloud. She didn't answer. Of course she didn't. Sawyer stood, paced to the window, looked out at the storm still battering his land. The rain was easing finally, but the damage was done. That road would be a mess for days. If anyone came looking for her, they wouldn't get through until... Would anyone come looking? The question sat heavy in his chest. Because if someone had left her out there deliberately, if she'd been abandoned, and everything about this situation screamed abandoned, then no one was coming, no one was looking. She was alone, just like him. Sawyer turned back to the bed, watched the slow rise and fall of her breathing, and felt something uncomfortable twist in his gut. He didn't want this, didn't want a stranger in his cabin, didn't want the responsibility, didn't want the questions that would come when people found out he'd taken in a woman with no explanation and no chaperone. But what the hell else was he supposed to do? He sat back down in the chair, leaned his elbows on his knees, and waited. Bish. She woke up screaming. It was full dark outside, the storm finally blown itself out, and Sawyer had just started to doze when she lurched upright with a cry that made him jump out of the chair with his hand on his knife. No, no, please! Hey! He grabbed her shoulders, tried to push her back down. You're safe, it's... She fought him, weak, uncoordinated, but desperate. Her hand slapped at his chest, his face, and she was still screaming, words that didn't make sense, half sobbed and frantic. Stop it! Sawyer caught her wrists, held them tight. Stop, you're safe, I'm not... Her eyes focused on him, and she froze. They stared at each other. She was breathing hard, her whole body shaking. Her hair was a mess, half dried and tangled around her face. The blankets had slipped down to her waist, and she seemed to realize, all at once, that she was naked underneath them. Her face went white, then red. Where? Her voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. Where am I? My cabin. Sawyer let go of her wrist, stepped back, hands up like she was a spooked horse. You were on the road, in the storm. I brought you here. She looked around, wild-eyed, taking in the rough walls, the single room, the fire, the door. Looking for an escape, maybe, or looking for whoever had left her. My trunk, she said suddenly. There was a trunk. Outside. I'll bring it in. I need... She stopped, seemed to realize she was clutching the blankets to her chest with white knuckles. I need my clothes. They're wet and torn. He nodded toward the pile of ruined fabric by the fire. I had to cut them off. You were freezing. Her eyes went to the pile, then back to him, and he saw the moment the implications hit her. Her face did something complicated. Fear, shame, anger, all at once. You saved your life, Sawyer said flatly. You're welcome. That stopped her. She closed her mouth, looked down at the blankets, then back up at him. Her eyes were dark, brown maybe, hard to tell in the firelight. Smart eyes. Wary. I didn't ask you to, she said finally. No, you were unconscious. I mean, I didn't ask to be rescued. Sawyer stared at her. Would you rather I left you in the mud to die? She didn't answer that, just looked away, jaw tight. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and sharp. Sawyer didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't good at this, at talking, at people, at navigating whatever the hell this was. He lived alone for a reason. What's your name? He asked, because it seemed like the thing to say. She hesitated, like even that was something she had to decide whether to give him. Then quietly, Vivian. Vivian Mercer. Sawyer Hale. Another silence. What were you doing out there, Miss Mercer? Her hands tightened on the blankets. That's none of your business. You're in my bed wearing my blankets in my cabin. Think it's a little bit my business. Her eyes flashed. I didn't ask. Yeah, you said that already. Sawyer crossed his arms. I'm asking anyway. What happened? For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she laughed, a short, bitter sound that didn't have any humor in it. I was supposed to get married. Sawyer waited. He sent for me, she continued, not looking at him. From Boston. We'd been corresponding for 6 months. He said he owned a ranch, said he wanted a wife, said... She stopped, swallowed. He promised to meet me in town, at the hotel. I came all the way from Boston, and he never showed up. So you went looking for him? I hired a man with a wagon to take me to the ranch. Her voice was flat now, empty. He took my money, got halfway there and told me Mr. Garrett, my fiancé, had sent word that morning, called off the wedding, said I should go back east. Sawyer felt something cold settle in his chest. And then? And then he told me to get out of the wagon, left me there, took my trunk down, set it in the road, and drove away. She looked up at him finally, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or might have been rage. I tried to walk, but the storm came and I didn't... She stopped, looked away again. Sawyer didn't say anything. What the hell was there to say? Some bastard named Garrett had ordered a bride like she was livestock, changed his mind, and left her to die rather than face her himself. And another bastard had taken her money and dumped her in the middle of nowhere during a storm. It was the kind of story that made Sawyer remember why he didn't trust people. "What's his name, Wild?" he asked. "The man who drove the wagon." "Why?" "Because I want to know." Vivian studied him for a long moment. Then, "Crenshaw. Bill Crenshaw." Sawyer filed that away. He knew Crenshaw, a mean drunk who hired himself out for odd jobs when he needed drinking money, the kind of man who'd leave a woman to die without losing sleep over it. "And Garrett?" he asked. "Thomas Garrett." Her mouth twisted. "Of the Garrett Ranch, apparently, 20 miles west of town, one of the largest in the county." She said it like a curse. Sawyer knew that name too. Everyone did. Garrett ran cattle and men with equal cruelty, and had enough money to make people forget he was a bastard, the kind of man who could ruin lives and call it business. "Why'd he change his mind?" Sawyer asked. Vivian's face went hard. "I don't know. I never got the chance to ask." Another silence. Sawyer looked at her, this Eastern woman with her soft hands and her ruined dress, sitting in his bed like a shipwreck survivor. She should be crying, should be falling apart, but instead she just looked angry, and somehow that was worse. "You can stay here tonight," he said finally. "Storm's over, but the road's a mess. Can't get you to town until it dries. I don't have money for a hotel." "Didn't ask for money. I'm not a charity case." "Didn't say you were." Sawyer grabbed his coat off the floor. "I'm going to check on the mare and bring in your trunk. There might be something dry in there you can wear." He was at the door when she spoke again. "Mr. Hale." He stopped, didn't turn around. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not leaving me." Sawyer didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and walked out into the night. Chap. The trunk was exactly what he expected, full of the kind of things a woman brought west when she thought she was starting a new life. Dresses, undergarments, a few books, letters tied with ribbon, all of it soaked through, smelling of mud and rainwater. Sawyer carried it inside and set it by the fire. Vivian was still in bed, wrapped in blankets, watching him with those wary eyes. "Might be able to dry some of this," he said, opening the trunk. "If we—" He stopped. At the bottom of the trunk, underneath everything else, was a wedding dress. White silk, carefully folded, embroidered with tiny flowers. The kind of thing that cost more than Sawyer made in 6 months. It was ruined. The water had stained it brown, and the mud had ground into the fabric in ways that would never come out. Vivian made a sound, small, choked. Sawyer looked up and saw her staring at the dress with an expression that made his chest hurt. "I'll hang it up," he said quietly. "Might dry enough to—" "Don't." Her voice was sharp. "Don't bother. It doesn't matter." "Miss Mercer." "It doesn't matter." She was shaking, the blankets clutched so tight her knuckles were white. "None of it matters. The dress, the letters, the promises, all of it was—" She stopped, turned her face away. Sawyer stood there holding a ruined wedding dress and feeling completely useless. He wasn't good at this. Wasn't good at comfort or kind words or knowing what to say when someone was breaking apart in front of him. So he did the only thing he could think of. He folded the dress carefully, set it aside, and started pulling out the other clothes. Found a simple day dress that was less damaged than the rest, a cotton thing that might dry by morning. Found undergarments, stockings, a shawl. "These should work," he said, laying them out near the fire. "I'll turn around. You can get dressed." He heard her move, heard the rustle of fabric and the soft sound of her breathing, kept his eyes on the wall and tried not to think about the fact that she was naked 10 feet away from him. "You can look now." He turned. She'd gotten the dress on somehow, though it hung on her wrong and the buttons and back were only half done. She looked small in it, fragile, nothing like the angry woman who'd woken up screaming. "You want help with those buttons?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He stepped behind her, worked the buttons one by one. His hands felt too big, too rough for the delicate fabric. He could feel the heat of her skin through the dress, could smell something faint and floral that didn't belong in his cabin at all. "There," he said, stepping back. "Thank you." She turned to face him, and they stood there in the firelight, Two strangers who had no business being in the same room together. "You should eat something," Sawyer said finally. "I've got stew. It's not fancy, but I'm not hungry." "You need to eat anyway. You nearly died." "I said I'm not, and I said you need to eat." He crossed to the stove, ladled stew into a bowl. "So you're going to sit down and eat, and then you're going to sleep, and tomorrow we'll figure out what happens next." Vivian stared at him. "You can't just order me around." "I just did." "I'm not one of your animals." "No, you're a woman who almost froze to death and probably hasn't eaten in 2 days. He set the bowl on the table. "Sit." For a moment he thought she'd refuse out of pure stubbornness. Then her stomach growled, loud enough to hear across the room, and her face went red. She sat. Sawyer watched her eat, slow at first, then faster, like she couldn't help herself. The stew was basic, just meat and potatoes and whatever vegetables he'd managed to grow last summer, but she ate like it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. When she finished, she set down the spoon and looked at him. "What happens tomorrow?" Sawyer leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Road should be passable in a day or two. I'll take you to town, find you a room at the hotel. I told you, I don't have money." "Then we'll figure something out." "Like what?" He didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, he didn't know. A woman alone with no money, no family, no prospects, that was a bad situation any way you looked at it. Especially out here, where people talked and reputation mattered, and a woman's value was measured in things Vivian Mercer didn't have anymore. "You got anyone back east?" he asked. "Someone who could send money?" "No." "No family at all?" "My parents are dead. I have an aunt in Boston, but we don't—" She stopped. "She wouldn't help, even if I asked." "Why not?" Vivian's jaw tightened. "Because she told me not to come west. Told me I was being foolish. That men who advertise for wives are desperate for a reason. She said if I left, I was on my own." She laughed, that bitter sound again. Turns out she was right. Sawyer didn't say anything. What could he say? That her aunt was cruel? That leaving a woman stranded was worse than saying, "I told you so"? It didn't change anything. "You could write to her anyway," he tried. "Explain what happened." "No." Vivian stood up, wrapped her arms around herself. "I'd rather die than go back there and admit she was right." "That's stupid. Maybe. But it's my choice." She walked to the window, looked out at the darkness. Sawyer watched her, this stubborn woman who'd rather starve than ask for help, and felt something uncomfortably close to respect. "The bed's yours tonight," he said. "I'll sleep on the floor." "That's not arguing about this." He grabbed a blanket, spread it near the fire. "You need real rest. I've slept worse places." Vivian turned to look at him. "Why are you helping me?" "Already told you. Couldn't leave you to die. But why do you care?" Sawyer stopped. That was a harder question. Why did he care? He'd spent 3 years building a life that specifically didn't include other people, didn't include complications or responsibilities beyond his land and his animals. He'd learned the hard way that trusting people got you hurt, that letting them in gave them power to destroy you. So why had he stopped? Why had he pulled her out of the mud and brought her here and cut off her clothes and fed her his food? "I don't know," he said finally, and it was the truth. "But you're here now, so we deal with it." Vivian studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, and walked to the bed. Sawyer lay down on the floor, pulled the blanket over himself, and stared at the ceiling. He could hear her breathing, slow and even, could hear the fire crackling, the wind outside, the familiar sounds of his cabin. And one unfamiliar sound. A woman crying very quietly, trying not to be heard. He didn't say anything, didn't move. Just listened until the crying stopped and her breathing evened out into sleep. Then he closed his eyes and tried not to think about what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Morning came cold and clear. Sawyer woke to gray light filtering through the window and his back screaming from a night on the floor. He sat up slowly, every muscle protesting, and looked at the bed. Vivian was still asleep, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek. In sleep, she looked younger, less guarded, almost peaceful. Sawyer stood quietly, banked the fire, and slipped outside. The storm had rearranged his world. The road was a disaster, deep ruts and standing water that would take days to drain. One of his fence posts was down, and half the vegetable garden he'd spent weeks building was underwater. The lean-to had held, thank God, and the mare was fine, but the chicken coop looked like it had tried to migrate during the night. He spent the morning doing damage control, fixing what could be fixed, assessing what couldn't. It was past noon when he finally went back inside, muddy and exhausted. Vivian was awake. She'd found his comb somehow, and was working it through her hair with the kind of patience that spoke of practice. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression had changed overnight. Less raw, more contained. "The road?" she asked. "Bad. 2, maybe 3 days before a wagon can get through." She nodded, like she'd expected that. "What do you need me to do?" Sawyer stared at her. "What?" "To help." She set down the comb. "I'm staying here, eating your food, using your bed. I should work for it." "You don't have to teach." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm. "I won't be a burden. So tell me what needs doing." Sawyer looked at her, this Eastern woman in her half-dried dress and her soft hands, and tried to imagine her doing anything useful on a homestead. She probably didn't know the first thing about livestock or fences or hauling water, but there was something in her eyes that said she meant it, that she needed this, needed to be useful, needed to prove something to herself, if not to him. "All right," he said slowly. "You know how to feed chickens?" She lifted her chin. "I can learn." She couldn't learn. Not at first, anyway. The chickens scattered when she approached, squawking like she'd come at them with a knife instead of a bucket of feed. She threw the grain too hard, too scattered, and half of it ended up in the dirt where the birds wouldn't touch it. By the time she finished, her dress was covered in dust, and she had a scratch on her hand from a particularly aggressive hen. Sawyer watched from the doorway of the barn, arms crossed, trying not to smile. "They hate me," Vivian said, brushing dirt off her skirt with sharp, frustrated movements. "They're chickens. They hate everyone." "They don't seem to hate you." "That's because I don't throw food at them like I'm angry at it." She shot him a look that would have wilted a lesser man. "I wasn't angry at it." "Could have fooled me." Vivian opened her mouth, probably to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She set down the bucket and wiped her hands on her skirt, already ruined anyway, and said, "What else?" Over the next 3 days, Sawyer discovered that Vivian Mercer was possibly the most stubborn woman he'd ever met. She couldn't feed chickens without starting a riot, couldn't haul water without spilling half of it, couldn't split kindling without nearly taking off her own foot. But she kept trying. Every time she failed, she'd set her jaw, take a breath, and try again. It was exhausting to watch. "You're holding the axe wrong," Sawyer said on the second day, after she'd spent 20 minutes hacking at a piece of wood without making any real progress. "I'm holding it fine. You're choking up on the handle. You need leverage." "I have leverage." "Vivian." She stopped, looked at him. Her face was flushed from effort, hair falling out of the knot she'd tried to pin it in. "What?" "Let me show you." He took the axe from her hands. She resisted for a second, then let go, and repositioned his grip. "See? Hands further apart. Let the weight of the axe do the work. Don't force it." He brought it down clean, and the wood split with a satisfying crack. Vivian watched, then held out her hand. Again. He gave her the axe. She adjusted her grip the way he'd shown her, swung, and missed the wood entirely. The axe buried itself in the chopping block. "Damn it!" "Better," Sawyer said, and meant it. "At least you didn't hit your foot." She glared at him, but there was something almost like a smile at the corner of her mouth. By the third day, the road had dried enough that Sawyer could have hitched the wagon and taken her to town. He told himself he was waiting another day to be safe, that the ruts were still too deep, that he needed to finish repairs on the fence line first. All of it was true. None of it was the real reason. The real reason was that he'd gotten used to having her there. Not comfortable. Wasn't comfortable having someone else in his space, disrupting his routine, asking questions and needing things. But used to it. The cabin felt less empty with her moving around in it. The silence felt less heavy when broken by her voice, even when she was complaining about the chickens. He didn't examine that feeling too closely. On the morning of the 4th day, Vivian came out of the cabin just as Sawyer was checking the mare's hooves. She'd washed her dress as best she could, and her hair was braided back in a way that made her look more like herself, whoever that was. Less like a drowned stranger, more like a person with a past. "The road's dry," she said. It wasn't a question. Mostly. So you can take me to town today. Sawyer straightened, wiped his hands on his pants. If that's what you want. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. What I want isn't really relevant, is it? I can't stay here forever. Didn't say you could. So what's the plan? You drop me at the hotel with no money and no prospects and wish me luck? There was an edge to her voice that hadn't been there before. Not anger exactly, something sharper, something that sounded like fear trying to pass itself off as defiance. Sawyer met her eyes. I'm not just dropping you anywhere. We'll figure something out. Like what? I don't know yet. That's not a plan, Mr. Hale. It's all I've got. They stared at each other, the morning sun climbing higher, the mare shifting restlessly beside them. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called. I want to see him, Vivian said suddenly. Sawyer frowned. Who? Thomas Garrett. Her hands clenched at her sides. Before I leave, I want to see the man who did this to me. Every instinct Sawyer had said that was a bad idea. Why? Because I deserve answers. Because he owes me that much. He doesn't owe you anything. Men like Garrett don't think they owe anyone. I don't care what he thinks. Her voice was quiet but iron hard. I came 2,000 miles because he asked me to, because he made promises. And then he threw me away like I was nothing. So yes, I want to see him. I want to look him in the eye and ask him why. Sawyer could have said no. Should have said no. Taking her to Garrett's ranch was asking for trouble, and trouble was the last thing either of them needed. But he looked at her face, at the set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes, and knew she'd go with or without him. And if she went alone, it would be worse. Fine, he said. We'll go. But I'm coming with you. I don't need, not arguing about this. You want to face Garrett, fine. But you're not doing it alone. Vivian opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded once, sharp. Get your things, Sawyer said. We leave in an hour. The Garrett Ranch sat like a kingdom on the edge of the county. Sprawling buildings, miles of fence line, cattle scattered across pastures that seemed to go on forever. The main house was 2 stories of painted wood and glass windows, the kind of place that announced money before you even got to the door. Sawyer hated it on sight. They'd hitched the wagon and driven in silence, Vivian sitting rigid beside him with her trunk at her feet and her hands folded in her lap. The closer they got, the tighter her jaw became, until Sawyer thought her teeth might crack from the pressure. You don't have to do this, he said as they pulled up to the house. Yes, I do. A man came out onto the porch. Not Garrett, someone younger, wearing a vest and a suspicious expression. Help you? Sawyer set the brake. We're here to see Thomas Garrett. Mr. Garrett doesn't take visitors without an appointment. He'll take this one. Vivian climbed down from the wagon before Sawyer could help her, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. Tell him Vivian Mercer is here. The man's expression changed, a flicker of recognition, quickly hidden. Wait here. He disappeared inside. Vivian stood at the base of the porch steps, spine straight, hands clenched. Sawyer came to stand beside her. If he doesn't come out, we leave, Sawyer said quietly. He'll come. She was right. 5 minutes later, the door opened again, and Thomas Garrett stepped out. He was tall, well-dressed, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of face that probably made women overlook his cruelty. He looked at Vivian with something that might have been surprise or might have been annoyance. Miss Mercer, he said, like they were meeting at a social function. This is unexpected. Vivian didn't move. You promised to marry me. I changed my mind. Just like that, simple. Like it meant nothing. Sawyer felt his hands curl into fists. Why? Vivian's voice didn't shake. What changed? Garrett came down the steps, stopped a few feet away. Up close, Sawyer could see the calculation in his eyes, the cold assessment of a man who measured everything in terms of use and profit. You want the truth? Garrett asked. Yes? All right. I needed a wife. Or rather, I needed the appearance of one. There's a land deal I'm negotiating, and the man I'm dealing with has certain traditional values. He wants to see that I'm settled, respectable, a family man. He said it like he was discussing livestock. I thought a mail-order bride would suffice, someone grateful enough not to ask questions.
Vivian's face had gone very pale. And then? And then I saw you. The words hung in the air like a slap.
I saw you get off the train, Garrett continued, almost conversational, and I realized my mistake. You're pretty enough, I suppose, but you have opinions written all over your face. Intelligence. The kind of woman who asks questions and expects answers. The kind who'd be a problem instead of a solution. He shrugged. So I sent Crenshaw to take care of it. Take care of it, Vivian repeated, her voice hollow. You mean abandon me in the middle of nowhere during a storm. I paid him to take you back to town. What he did after that wasn't my concern. Sawyer stepped forward before he could stop himself. You son of a... Garrett's eyes flicked to him, dismissive. Who's this? Your new protector? He saved my life, Vivian said, after your man left me to die. How dramatic. Garrett turned back toward the house. You got your answers, Miss Mercer. Now get off my property. Wait. Vivian's voice stopped him. The money I paid Crenshaw for the wagon. I want it back. Garrett laughed, an ugly sound. Take it up with Crenshaw, not my problem. You made it your problem when you hired him. I don't owe you anything. He looked at her with something close to contempt. You came west chasing a fantasy. That's not my fault. Go back to Boston, find some clerk to marry you, and stop wasting my time. He went inside. The door closed with a sharp click. Vivian stood very still, staring at the closed door. The silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of cattle in the distance and the creak of the wagon. Vivian, Sawyer said quietly. She didn't respond. Come on, let's go. He threw me away, she said, so softly he almost didn't hear it. Like I was trash, like I didn't matter at all. He's not worth... I sold everything I owned. Her voice was getting louder, shaking. Everything. My mother's jewelry, my books, my piano. I gave up my whole life to come here because he promised. He promised. She stopped, took a breath. Another. Then she walked to the wagon, climbed up, and sat down without a word. Sawyer followed, released the brake, and turned the horses back toward the road. Neither of them spoke. They were halfway back to his cabin when Vivian finally broke the silence. I can't go to town, she said. Sawyer glanced at her. Why not? Because everyone will know. The hotel, the shops. They'll all know I was coming to marry Garrett. They'll know he rejected me. I'll be... She stopped, swallowed. I'll be a joke. Cautionary tale. The desperate Eastern woman who wasn't good enough. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She looked at him, and her eyes were dry but fierce. You know how small towns work. By tomorrow, everyone will be talking about the woman Thomas Garrett found too troublesome to marry. No one will hire me. No one will help me. I'll be ruined. Sawyer wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because she was right. A woman's reputation was everything out here, and Vivian's was already destroyed before she'd even set foot in town. So what do you want to do? He asked. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then, can I stay with you? Sawyer's hands tightened on the reins. What? Just for a little while. Until I figure out what to do next. I'll work. I'm getting better at the chores. I won't be useless. I just need time to think, to plan. Vivian, you can't. People will talk. Let them talk. What else can they do to me? She turned to face him fully. Please. I have nowhere else to go. Sawyer stared at the road ahead, his mind racing. This was a terrible idea. Having an unmarried woman living in his cabin would cause exactly the kind of scandal she was trying to avoid. People would assume things, would say things. His reputation would suffer along with hers. But what was the alternative? Drop her in town with no money and no prospects? Watch her become exactly what she feared, a cautionary tale, a woman destroyed by circumstances and cruel men? He thought about finding her in the storm, thought about the way she'd fought to learn things she had no business knowing, thought about the look on her face when Garrett had told her she didn't matter. All right, he heard himself say. You can stay, for a while. Vivian let out a breath. Thank you. But we're setting rules. She nodded. Whatever you need. You pull your weight. I'm not running a charity. I will. And when people ask, because they will ask, we tell them you're working off room and board, nothing else. Agreed. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it felt different now, less heavy, almost like a decision made together instead of one forced by desperation. When they reached the cabin, Sawyer helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. Vivian stood in the doorway, looking at the small space like she was seeing it for the first time. "It's not much," Sawyer said. "It's more than I had yesterday." She turned to him. "I'll earn my keep, I promise." "I know you will." And somehow, standing there in the fading light with this impossible woman who'd crashed into his life during a storm, Sawyer believed it. The next week proved him right in ways he hadn't expected. Vivian attacked every task like it was personal. She burned breakfast twice, but by the third day she'd figured out the temperamental stove. She flooded the chicken coop trying to clean it, but learned to manage the birds without causing a stampede. She couldn't mend a fence to save her life, but she could organize his disaster of a supply shed until he could actually find things. She never complained, never asked for special treatment. When her hands blistered from hauling water, she wrapped them in cloth and kept going. When she caught her dress on a nail and tore a long gash in the skirt, she cut it shorter and kept working. Sawyer found himself watching her more than he should, found himself noticing the determined set of her shoulders when she was frustrated, the flash of satisfaction when she finally got something right, the way she'd sit on the porch in the evenings, exhausted and dirty, and stare at the horizon like she was trying to memorize it. "What are you thinking about?" he asked one night, handing her a cup of coffee. She took it, wrapping both hands around the warmth. "That I was supposed to hate this." "What?" "The work, the dirt, all of it." She gestured at the cabin, the land, herself. "I was raised to be a lady, piano lessons and embroidery and learning which fork to use. My aunt told me I was too delicate for the frontier, that I'd break the first time I had to do real work." "You haven't broken yet." "No." She smiled, small and surprised. "I haven't." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee as the sun set. It was the first time Sawyer could remember feeling at peace with another person in his space. It didn't last. The trouble started when he rode to town for supplies. He'd put it off as long as he could, but they needed flour and salt and a dozen other things he couldn't make or grow. He left Vivian with instructions to feed the animals and stay close to the cabin, and rode out before dawn. The general store was run by a man named Pritchard, who'd never met a piece of gossip he didn't want to spread. Sawyer knew this, had planned to get in and out fast, but Pritchard had other ideas. "Heard you had some excitement out your way," Pritchard said as he measured flour. Sawyer kept his face neutral. "That's so. Storm hit you pretty hard, I heard. Fence damage, road washed out." "Road's fine now, geek out." "That's good, that's good." Pritchard tied off the flour sack with deliberate slowness. "Also heard you had a visitor. Woman got off the train couple weeks back, supposed to marry Thomas Garrett." Here it was. Sawyer had known it was coming, but it still made his jaw tight. "She needed help," he said shortly. "I'm sure she did." Pritchard's smile was knowing. "Must be nice having a woman around the place again. How long's she planning to stay?" "That's not your concern." "Just curious. People talk, a single woman living with a single man." "She's working off room and board." Sawyer kept his voice level with effort. "Nothing else happening." Sure, I believe you." Pritchard's tone said he believed nothing of the kind. "Still, you might want to think about appearances, especially with a woman like that." Sawyer's hands clenched. "A woman like what?" "Well, she wasn't good enough for Garrett, was she? Makes a man wonder what's wrong with her." Sawyer was across the counter before he realized he'd moved, grabbing Pritchard by the shirt front. "Listen to me very carefully. You don't know her. You don't know what happened, so keep her name out of your mouth before I put my fist in it." Pritchard's eyes went wide. "I didn't mean—" "Yeah, you did." Sawyer let him go, stepped back. "How much do I owe you?" They completed the transaction in tight silence. Sawyer loaded the supplies into the wagon and left before he did something stupid, like actually hit the man. But the damage was done. By the time he got back to the cabin, he was furious, not at Pritchard, but at the situation. At the unfairness of a world where Vivian was judged and found wanting by people who didn't know the first thing about her. She was waiting on the porch when he pulled up, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. What happened? Nothing. Sawyer. He climbed down, started unloading supplies more aggressively than necessary. "People are talking. About you. About us."
Vivian went very still. What are they saying? What do you think they're saying? She closed her eyes briefly. I told you this would happen. Yeah, well, hearing it and dealing with it are two different things. He dropped a sack of flour harder than he meant to, and it split across the bottom, spilling white powder everywhere. Damn it! Let me help. I don't need help. He grabbed the torn sack, tried to salvage what was left. What I need is for people to mind their own business. You knew what this would look like when you agreed to let me stay. I know that. He turned to face her. But knowing it and hearing some bastard like Pritchard imply that we're... He stopped, too angry to finish. Vivian's face was pale but composed. I should leave. No. It's the only way to stop the talk. I don't care about the talk. You should. Your reputation... My reputation is that I'm a stubborn loner who doesn't give a damn what anyone thinks. That part's true. He set down the ruined flower, faced her fully. You're not leaving because of gossip. Then what do you suggest? Sawyer opened his mouth, closed it, because he didn't have an answer. The truth was, there was no good solution. She stayed, people talked. She left, she had nowhere to go. Either way, she paid the price for someone else's cruelty. It made him want to hit something. We ignore them, he said finally. You stay, you work, and we ignore every busybody who has an opinion about it. For how long? As long as it takes. As long as what takes? Sawyer didn't answer that, because he didn't know what he meant. As long as it took for her to save enough to leave, for people to stop caring, for something to change, or as long as it took for him to figure out why the thought of her leaving felt wrong. He turned back to the wagon, started unloading again. After a moment, Vivian came to help. They worked in silence, putting away supplies, sweeping up spilled flour, falling into the rhythm they'd developed over the past week. It wasn't until later, after dinner, that she spoke again. Thank you, she said quietly, for defending me. To Pritchard. Sawyer looked up from the harness he was mending. You heard about that? Small town. Word travels. She was sitting by the fire, mending her own clothes, another skill she'd taught herself. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Why? Because the thought of anyone talking about her that way made him furious, because she'd done nothing wrong and deserved better, because somewhere in the past week she'd stopped being a stranger and started being something else. But he couldn't say any of that, so he just shrugged and went back to his mending. They sat in silence, working on their separate tasks, and Sawyer tried not to think about how natural this felt, how right, how much trouble that was going to cause them both. The trouble didn't stop with Pritchard. 2 days later, a woman showed up at the cabin, Mrs. Adelaide Kern, wife of the county land office clerk, wearing a dress that cost more than Sawyer made in 3 months and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sawyer was fixing a section of fence when he saw her buggy coming up the road. He stood slowly, hammer in hand, watching her approach with the wariness of a man who knew trouble when he saw it. Vivian came out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd been doing laundry, and her sleeves were rolled up, hair escaping from its braid. She looked more like a homesteader's wife than a Boston lady, and something about that made Sawyer's chest tight. Mrs. Kern, Vivian said, polite but cautious. This is unexpected. Miss Mercer. Adelaide Kern climbed down from her buggy without waiting for help, smoothing her skirts with practiced precision. I thought it was time we met properly, since you're staying in the area. I'm not... Vivian started, then seemed to think better of it. It's temporary. Of course. Mrs. Kern's smile sharpened. Still, I wanted to extend some neighborly advice, woman to woman. Sawyer started walking toward them. He didn't like the tone in Adelaide Kern's voice, didn't like the way she was looking at Vivian like something to be assessed and judged. Ma'am, he said, nodding, can I help you with something? Mr. Hale, I was just telling Miss Mercer that the Ladies' Society would be happy to help her find more appropriate accommodations. In town, perhaps. There's a boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson, very respectable, very proper, much more suitable for an unmarried woman. I'm fine where I am, Vivian said. Are you? Mrs. Kern's eyebrows lifted. Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a situation that could ruin your reputation entirely. If you have any hope of finding a husband, I don't. The words came out flat, final.
Mrs. Kern blinked. I beg your pardon? I don't have any hope of finding a husband, or want one. Vivian's hands clenched in her apron. I came west to marry Thomas Garrett. He rejected me. The whole county knows it. So my reputation is already ruined, Mrs. Kern. Living here or living in town won't change that. But surely, what I need is work and a roof over my head. Mr. Hale has given me both in exchange for labor. That's the arrangement. I'm sorry if it offends your sensibilities, but I don't have the luxury of worrying about appearances anymore. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Mrs. Kern's face had gone tight, her smile completely gone. I see. Well, I suppose some women have lower standards than others. Sawyer felt his temper spike. Ma'am, I think it's time for you to leave. I'm only trying to help. No, you're not. Vivian's voice was quiet but steady. You came here to remind me that I'm a scandal, that I'm not good enough for your ladies' society or your boarding house or your town. You came here to make sure I know my place. Well, I do. My place is here, working for my keep until I can afford to go somewhere else. And what you or anyone else thinks about it doesn't matter. Mrs. Kern stared at her, 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. You'll regret this, both of you. When no one in town will do business with you, when you're completely ostracized. I already don't do business with most people in town, Sawyer said. And I've been ostracized since I got here, so nothing's changed for me. Mr. Hale, you should go. Adelaide Kern looked between them, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Then she climbed back into her buggy, gathered the reins, and drove away without another word. Sawyer watched until the buggy disappeared around the bend, then turned to find Vivian still standing rigid, hands shaking. You all right? He asked. I shouldn't have said those things. Why not? They were true. Because now she'll tell everyone, and it'll be worse. The talk will be worse. Let it be worse. Sawyer picked up his hammer, turned back to the fence. We've got work to do. Vivian didn't move for a long moment. Then she went back inside, and Sawyer heard the sound of her returning to the laundry with more force than necessary. He understood. He felt the same way, angry at the unfairness of it. Angry at people like Adelaide Kern who had nothing better to do than judge others. Angry at a world that gave men like Garrett power, and women like Vivian nothing. But anger didn't fix fences. So he focused on that instead. That night, Vivian was quiet through dinner. She picked at her food, stared at the fire, and barely said 2 words even when Sawyer tried to make conversation. Stop thinking about it, he said finally. About what? Whatever's eating at you. Mrs. Kern, the town, all of it. Vivian set down her fork. I can't just stop thinking about it. Why not? Because it matters. What people think matters. No, it doesn't. Easy for you to say. You're a man. You can live however you want, and people just call you independent. I live the same way, and I'm ruined. She wasn't wrong. Sawyer knew that, hated it, but couldn't change it. So what do you want to do? He asked. Move to town? Live in that boarding house where Adelaide Kern can keep an eye on you? No. Then stay here and stop worrying about people who don't matter. They do matter, though. Vivian's voice cracked slightly. Because they're the ones who'll decide if I can work, if I can buy things, if I can exist anywhere but here. And the longer I stay, the worse it gets for both of us. Sawyer leaned back in his chair, studying her. You want to leave? I don't know what I want. She pressed her hands to her face. I just know that this isn't fair to you. You saved my life, and I'm repaying you by destroying your reputation. My reputation was never that good to begin with. Sawyer, I mean it. I came out here to get away from people, to build something that was mine and not have to answer to anyone. So if people want to talk about me, let them. Doesn't change anything. Vivian lowered her hands, looked at him. Why did you come out here? You never said. Sawyer was quiet for a moment. He didn't talk about his past, had spent 3 years not talking about it, not thinking about it if he could help it. But something about the way Vivian was looking at him, the vulnerability in her question, made him answer. I had a farm, back in Missouri. Worked it with my father until he died, then kept it going myself. Met a woman, got engaged, thought I'd have the whole thing, wife, kids, a real life. He stopped, jaw tight. What happened? Vivian asked softly. Her father owned the land next to ours. Bigger spread, More money. He wanted to expand, and my land was in the way. So he made me an offer. I said no. Then suddenly my fiancée decided she'd made a mistake, married the son of my father's business partner instead, a man who was happy to sell out to her father for the right price. Vivian's expression shifted. She left you for him? Not just left. Helped convince me to accept her father's offer, said it was for the best, that I could start fresh somewhere else. Sawyer's hands clenched. I was an idiot. Believed her. Sold the farm, took the money, and found out later they'd paid about half what it was worth. By the time I realized, they'd already torn down my father's house and expanded their operation. That's awful. It was a lesson. Don't trust people. Don't let anyone close enough to destroy what you've built. Come out here, file a homestead claim, and build something that's mine alone. He looked at her. That's what I've been doing for 3 years, and it's worked fine until you showed up. The words came out harsher than he meant them. Vivian flinched. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean to ruin your life too. You didn't ruin anything. Yes, I did. You just said, I said it worked fine. Didn't say it was good. Sawyer stood, paced to the window. You know what I did before you got here? Worked, ate, slept. That was it. Didn't talk to anyone, didn't see anyone unless I had to go to town. Just existed. And I told myself that was enough. He turned to face her. Then you showed up, and suddenly I'm talking more than I have in 3 years. I'm teaching someone how to feed chickens and split wood and telling stories over dinner. And yeah, it's complicated. Yeah, people are talking, but it's also the first time since Missouri that I haven't felt completely alone. Vivian stared at him, eyes wide. So stop apologizing for being here, Sawyer said. You're not ruining anything. You're just making it different. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them seemed ready to say. Finally, Vivian stood. I should get some sleep. Yeah. She paused at the edge of the bed, still his bed, still the only bed, while he continued sleeping on the floor like he had since that first night. Sawyer? Yeah? Thank you for telling me. He nodded, throat tight. She climbed into bed, and Sawyer spread his blanket on the floor, and they lay there in the darkness, not sleeping, both thinking about things they couldn't take back. The next week brought the first real cold snap, a reminder that summer was ending and winter was coming, whether they were ready or not. Sawyer started working longer days, trying to finish the fence repairs and get the cabin reinforced before the hard weather hit. Vivian worked beside him without being asked. She'd gotten better at everything, could split kindling without endangering herself, could haul water without spilling half of it, could manage the chickens without causing chaos. She'd even started cooking meals that were actually good, figuring out the temperamental stove through sheer determination. Watching her work, Sawyer found himself thinking dangerous thoughts. Thoughts about what it would be like if this wasn't temporary. If she stayed through winter, through spring, through the next summer and the one after that, he told himself to stop. This was an arrangement, nothing more. She was here because she had nowhere else to go, and he was helping because leaving her to die wasn't an option. When she saved enough money or figured out her next move, she'd leave, and things would go back to normal. That's what he told himself. But then she'd laugh at something he said, or touch his arm when she was making a point, or sit beside him on the porch in the evenings with coffee and comfortable silence, and he'd feel something shift in his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. He was thinking about this, about her, about the future he kept telling himself not to imagine when Bill Crenshaw showed up. Sawyer was in the barn when he heard the horse approach. He came out to find Crenshaw dismounting, looking around the property with the casual assessment of a man pricing things for theft. "Hail," Crenshaw said, nodding. "Heard you had yourself some company." Sawyer's hands clenched. This was the man who'd left Vivian to die. The man who'd taken her money and abandoned her in a storm. "Get off my property." Crenshaw held up his hands. "Now, don't be unfriendly. I just came to check on the lady, make sure she's all right." "You mean make sure she's alive after you left her to die? Is that what she told you?" Crenshaw's smile was ugly. "Garrett paid me to take her to town. She's the one who insisted on going to the ranch. Got hysterical when I said no. I couldn't handle a woman like that, so I let her out to cool down. Not my fault she got caught in the storm." "That's a lie. Is it? Or is it the word of a desperate woman against mine?" Crenshaw's eyes narrowed. People in town are talking, Hale. Saying you've got Garrett's rejected bride living here like a wife. Saying all sorts of things about what you two get up to. Thought you should know before it causes real problems. Sawyer stepped forward. Leave. Now. Or what? Or I make you leave. Crenshaw looked at him, seemed to calculate his chances, and evidently decided they weren't good. He backed toward his horse, still smiling that ugly smile. Just trying to be helpful. But if you want to tie yourself to damaged goods, that's your choice. He swung into the saddle. Don't say I didn't warn you when it all falls apart. He rode off, and Sawyer stood there shaking with rage. Sawyer? He turned to find Vivian standing in the cabin doorway, face pale. How much did you hear? Enough. She came down the steps slowly. He's going to tell everyone his version. Make it sound like I'm lying. Let him. No one believes anything Crenshaw says. They'll believe this. Because it's easier than thinking a man like Garrett would be that cruel. She was right, and they both knew it. Sawyer scrubbed a hand over his face. This is getting worse. I know. Soon it won't just be talk, it'll be real problems. Merchants refusing to sell to me, people avoiding us completely. I know, Vivian said again, quieter. So we need to do something about it. She looked at him. Like what? Sawyer took a breath. He'd been thinking about this for days, turning it over in his mind, examining it from every angle, trying to convince himself it was a terrible idea. But the truth was, he'd already made the decision. He'd made it the moment he pulled her out of the mud. Maybe even before that. Marry me, he said. Vivian's eyes went wide. What? Marry me? Make it legal, make it real. Then it's not a scandal, it's just a marriage. Sawyer, you can't be serious? I'm completely serious. He stepped closer. Think about it. If we're married, none of this matters anymore. The talk stops. You have protection, respectability, and I get... He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. You get what? Vivian asked. A partner. Someone to build this life with. Someone to make this cabin feel like a home instead of a place to hide. But he couldn't say that. Not when she was staring at him like he'd lost his mind. I get help running this place, he said instead. It's a practical arrangement. Benefits both of us. That's insane. Why? Because we barely know each other. Because you don't want a wife. You said yourself you came out here to be alone. Because marriage is supposed to be about... She stopped, flustered. It's supposed to be about more than just stopping gossip. Is it? Sawyer crossed his arms. Seems to me most marriages out here are arrangements, partnerships, people working together to survive. That's what we're already doing. But you got a better idea? Vivian opened her mouth, closed it. I could leave. Go somewhere else, start over. With what money? And go where? You'll have the same problems anywhere you go. A woman alone, no references, no family. At least here you know what you're dealing with. I can't ask you to do this. You're not asking. I'm offering. He met her eyes. Look, I know this isn't what either of us planned. You were supposed to marry Garrett, build some kind of life with him. I was supposed to stay alone and not let anyone get close enough to hurt me. But things changed, and now we've got to deal with what is, not what we wanted. Vivian wrapped her arms around herself. What if it doesn't work? What if we can't stand each other after a month? Then we'll figure it out, but at least you'll be protected while we do. That's not fair to you. Let me worry about what's fair to me. She looked at him for a long moment, and Sawyer could see her thinking it through, weighing the options, calculating the risks, trying to find another way. But they both knew there wasn't one. This is crazy, she said finally. Yeah. We could both end up miserable. Could? You really want to do this? Sawyer thought about saying no, about taking it back, finding some other solution, keeping things the way they were. But the truth was, he did want this. Wanted it in a way that had nothing to do with practicality and everything to do with the way his chest felt tight when she laughed, the way she fit into his life like she belonged there. Yeah, he said. I do. Vivian took a shaky breath. Okay. Okay? Yes, I'll marry you. She laughed, a little wild. I'll marry you and we'll deal with whatever comes after. Sawyer felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, maybe.
Or fear. Probably both. All right then. He held out his hand. Vivian looked at it, then took it. Her hand was small in his, rough with new calluses, warm. When? She asked. Soon as possible. Before either of us changes our mind. That startled a real laugh out of her. Romantic. Never said I was romantic.
No, you didn't.
But she was smiling, and her hand was still in his. They stood there in the yard, holding hands like children, making promises neither of them was sure they could keep. And Sawyer thought maybe, just maybe, this was the best terrible decision he'd ever made. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Sawyer rode to town and filed the paperwork with the county clerk, a man who raised his eyebrows but didn't comment. Then he found the circuit preacher, a tired man named Reverend Walsh, who traveled between settlements performing marriages and baptisms. "You're sure about this?" Walsh asked, looking between the paperwork and Sawyer's face. "I'm sure. Because marriage is a serious commitment, before the eyes of—" "I know what it is," Sawyer interrupted. "Can you do it or not?" Walsh sighed. "Day after tomorrow. That give you enough time?" "That's fine." Back at the cabin, Vivian was trying to make her ruined dresses presentable. She'd washed and mended the best one she had, a dark blue cotton that had survived the storm better than the others, and was attempting to press it with a heated pan. "You don't have to do that," Sawyer said, watching her work. "Yes, I do. I'm not getting married in work clothes. No one's going to see it but Walsh." "I'll see it." She set down the pan, smoothed the fabric with careful hands. "I know this isn't a real wedding. I know it's just paperwork, but I'd like to at least look like a bride, even if I don't feel like one." Sawyer didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and went back outside to finish the repairs that needed doing before winter hit in earnest. That night they sat on the porch longer than usual. Neither of them seemed ready to go inside, to face the reality of what they'd agreed to. "Are you scared?" Vivian asked finally. "Yeah. Me too." "What are you scared of?" She was quiet for a moment. "That this won't be enough. That I'll try my best and still fail. That you'll wake up one day and regret saving me from that storm." Sawyer looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd crossed a continent for a man who didn't want her, who'd survived abandonment and storm and humiliation, who'd learned to split wood and feed chickens and hold her head high even when the whole town was talking. "I won't regret it," he said. "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do." He turned to face her fully. "You want to know what I'm scared of? I'm scared that I'll mess this up, that I'll be too stubborn or too closed off or too damaged to be what you need, that you'll realize you deserved better than a man who lives alone in the middle of nowhere and doesn't know how to talk about his feelings." Vivian's eyes were bright in the fading light. "I think we're both pretty damaged." "Probably." "So maybe we'll figure it out together." "Maybe." They sat in silence, shoulders almost touching, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. 2 days, Vivian said softly. 2 days. And then they'd be married, for better or worse, for real. Sawyer tried to feel ready for it, tried to convince himself that this was the right choice, the smart choice, the only choice that made sense, but mostly he just felt terrified. And from the way Vivian's hands were shaking when she stood to go inside, he suspected she felt exactly the same way. Reverend Walsh arrived exactly on time, riding a horse that looked as tired as he did. Sawyer met him at the property line, shook his hand, and led him to the cabin where Vivian was waiting. She'd done something with her hair, pinned it up in a way that made her look older, more composed. The blue dress fit her better than it had any right to, considering she'd altered it herself with shaking hands the night before. She looked nothing like the half-drowned woman he'd found in the storm, and everything like someone who was trying very hard to be brave. "Miss Mercer," Walsh said, nodding. "You look well." "Thank you, Reverend." "Shall we begin?" It wasn't a ceremony, not really. Walsh read from a small prayer book, stumbling over words in places, while Sawyer and Vivian stood side by side in front of the fireplace. There were no flowers, no guests, no music, just 3 people in a rough cabin, making something official that had started as survival. "Do you, Sawyer Hale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Sawyer looked at Vivian. She was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, hands clasped so hard her knuckles were white. She looked like she was facing a firing squad instead of a wedding.
I do, he said. And do you, Vivian Mercer, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Vivian's eyes flicked to his, just for a second. He saw fear there, and uncertainty, and something else he couldn't name. I do, she whispered. Walsh produced a ring, a simple gold band that Sawyer had purchased in town, using money he'd been saving for winter supplies. It was too big for Vivian's finger, but she curled her hand into a fist to keep it from sliding off. Then, by the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. Walsh closed his book. You may kiss the bride, if you'd like. The silence that followed was excruciating. Sawyer looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at the floor. Neither of them moved. Or not, Walsh said, clearing his throat. I'll just need you both to sign the certificate. They signed. Walsh witnessed it, folded the paper carefully, and handed it to Sawyer with an expression that suggested he'd seen plenty of awkward weddings, but this one might take the prize. Congratulations, he said, in a tone that suggested he wasn't sure congratulations were appropriate. I'll file this with the county when I get back to town. Appreciate it, Sawyer said. He paid Walsh, walked him back to his horse, and stood in the yard watching the Reverend ride away. When he turned around, Vivian was standing in the doorway, still wearing the blue dress, still looking like she might bolt at any second. So, she said. So, we're married. Yeah. She laughed, a short, slightly hysterical sound. I got married twice in 1 month. Once to a man who never showed up, and once to a man I barely know. I'm either very unlucky or very stupid. Could be both. That startled a real laugh out of her. She covered her mouth with her hand, the one wearing the too big ring, and shook her head. What do we do now? She asked. Sawyer had been wondering the same thing. They were married, legally and officially, but nothing had actually changed. She still slept in his bed. He still slept on the floor. They still worked side by side during the day and sat in careful silence at night. Except now there was a piece of paper that said they belonged to each other. We keep going, he said finally. Same as before. Same as before, Vivian repeated. She looked down at the ring, twisted it on her finger. Right, of course. She went inside, and Sawyer stayed in the yard longer than necessary, trying to figure out why getting what he wanted felt so much like making a terrible mistake. The first week of marriage was strange. They were both too careful with each other, overly polite, stepping around conversations that might lead somewhere uncomfortable. Vivian said thank you too many times. Sawyer found himself apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. It felt wrong, forced. This is ridiculous, Vivian said on the 5th day, slamming a pot down harder than necessary. We're acting like strangers. We are strangers. We're married strangers, that's different. She turned to face him, hands on her hips. We need to stop tiptoeing around each other. Fine. What do you want to talk about? I don't know. Anything. Everything. We're going to spend the rest of our lives together. We should probably know more about each other than our names. Sawyer set down the harness he'd been mending. All right, what do you want to know? Vivian thought for a moment. Why homesteading? Why not stay in Missouri? Find another farm? Because Missouri had too many memories. Out here I could start completely fresh. No one knew me. No one cared about my past, just me and the land. Do you miss it? Missouri? Sometimes. Not the people, but the land itself, yeah. It was good land. My father knew how to work it. What was he like? Sawyer was quiet. He didn't talk about his father, hadn't since the day he buried him. But something about the way Vivian was looking at him, genuinely curious, and not just making conversation, made him answer. Stubborn, practical. Didn't say much, but when he did, it mattered. He taught me everything about farming, when to plant, how to read weather, how to fix things when they broke. He paused. He would have hated what happened. Selling the farm, losing everything he built. Would have told me to fight harder. You couldn't have known they'd cheat you. No, but I should have been smarter. Should have seen it coming. Vivian crossed to sit beside him. My father was a banker. Very proper. Very concerned with appearances. He wanted me to marry someone appropriate, a clerk maybe, or a junior partner at his firm, someone who'd maintain our social standing. She smiled, bitter. He died before he could see me become a mail-order bride. Probably for the best. You think he would have been ashamed? I know he would have been. My mother, too. They raised me to be a lady, and ladies don't advertise for husbands in newspapers. But you did anyway. I did. She looked at her hands. After they died, I lived with my aunt. She made it very clear I was a burden, another mouth to feed, another person taking up space. I could have married locally, tried to find someone appropriate, but everyone I knew felt like my father's world, his expectations. I wanted something different, something mine. So you picked the frontier. I picked freedom, or what I thought was freedom. She twisted the ring on her finger. Turns out I'm still dependent on a man I barely know, just a different man in a different place. Sawyer studied her face. You're not dependent. You're working, earning your keep. It's not the same. Why not? Because I'm your wife now. The law says everything I do belongs to you. The work, the money, if I had any, even myself. I traded one kind of dependence for another. She wasn't wrong. The law was clear about what marriage meant for women, but hearing her say it out loud made Sawyer uncomfortable in ways he couldn't quite name. It doesn't have to be like that, he said. Doesn't it? No, we can make it different, make our own rules. Vivian looked at him, something careful and hopeful in her expression. What kind of rules? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. He met her eyes. I didn't marry you to own you, Vivian. I married you because it was the right thing to do, because you needed protection and I could give it. What we build from there, that's up to both of us. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, Thank you. For what? For trying, for caring, for being nothing like Thomas Garrett. Sawyer felt something shift between them, something that had been tense and careful starting to ease. It wasn't fixed, not by a long shot, but it was a start. That night, Vivian spoke up as Sawyer was spreading his blanket on the floor. This is stupid. He looked up. What is? You sleeping on the floor, we're married. We can share the bed. Sawyer's throat went dry. Vivian, I'm not suggesting, she flushed, flustered. I just mean there's no reason for you to wake up with a sore back every morning when there's a perfectly good bed right here. We're both adults. We can sleep in the same bed without anything happening. She was right. Logically, she was completely right. But the thought of lying next to her, close enough to touch, hearing her breathe in the darkness, I don't want to make you uncomfortable, he said. You won't. I trust you. Those 3 words hit harder than they should have. She trusted him. After everything. After Garrett. After Crenshaw. After being abandoned and betrayed, she still trusted him enough to share a bed. All right, he said. If you're sure. I'm sure. That first night was awkward. They both stayed rigidly on their own sides of the bed, careful not to touch, barely breathing. Sawyer lay there staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every sound she made, every shift of the blankets. But eventually, exhaustion won. He fell asleep listening to her breathing, and when he woke in the morning, she was still on her side of the bed, and he was still on his, and the world hadn't ended. It became their new normal, careful distance during the day, careful proximity at night. Neither of them mentioned it, but something about sharing the bed made the cabin feel more like a home and less like a temporary arrangement. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell in late October, heavy and wet, covering everything in white. Sawyer had prepared as best he could. Wood stacked high, supplies laid in, the cabin reinforced against the wind. But nothing really prepared you for a Wyoming winter until you'd lived through one. Vivian handled it better than he expected. She didn't complain about the cold or the isolation or the way the days became a monotonous routine of survival. Feed the animals, haul water, keep the fire going, cook, sleep, repeat. If anything, she seemed to thrive on the challenge. I like this, she said one evening, watching snow fall past the window. What, being trapped in a cabin with nothing to do? No. Having purpose. Back in Boston, I spent my days doing nothing. Piano lessons, embroidery, taking tea with people I didn't like. Everything was about appearances, about being proper. None of it mattered. She turned to him. Here, everything matters. If I don't feed the chickens, they don't eat. If I don't haul water, we don't drink. It's real. Sawyer understood that. It was part of why he'd come west in the first place. To do work that mattered, to build something tangible instead of playing social games that meant nothing. "You're good at it," he said. "At what?" "This. The work. Being a homesteader's wife." Vivian smiled. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "I'm not good at nice things." "I know. That's why it means something when you say them." The storm that changed everything came in December. It started as just another snowfall, heavy, but nothing they couldn't handle. Sawyer went out to check on the animals, make sure the lean-to was secure. The wind was picking up, driving snow sideways, and visibility was dropping fast. He was coming back from the chicken coop when his boot caught on ice, hidden under fresh snow. His feet went out from under him, and he went down hard. The pain was immediate and blinding. His ankle twisted wrong, and he heard something pop that definitely shouldn't pop. "Damn it!" he gasped, trying to stand. His leg wouldn't hold weight. The pain when he tried was enough to make him see stars. He sat there in the snow, breathing hard, trying to think through the pain. The cabin was maybe 30 yards away. He could crawl if he had to. He just needed to... "Sawyer?" Vivian's voice calling from the cabin door. He could barely see her through the driving snow. "Stay inside," he shouted back. "Where are you?" "I'm fine, just..." "Sawyer Hale, if you don't answer me right now." "By the chicken coop. I fell." He heard her swear, actual profanity that would have made her aunt faint. And then she was running toward him, slipping and sliding in the snow, no coat, no gloves. "What happened?" She dropped to her knees beside him. "Ankle. I can't..." "It won't hold weight." Vivian looked at his leg, then at the cabin, then back at him. Her face was already red from cold, hair coming loose from its pins. "Can you stand at all?" "Not without help." "Then put your arm around my shoulders. We're getting you inside." "Vivian, you can't." "I can, and I will. Now move before we both freeze to death." Getting him back to the cabin was a nightmare. He leaned on her heavily, trying not to put weight on the bad ankle, and she half dragged, half carried him through the snow. By the time they reached the door, they were both gasping for air, covered in snow, and shaking from cold and effort. Vivian got him inside, helped him to the bed, then ran back to close the door against the wind. She stood there for a moment, breathing hard, snow melting in her hair. "Let me see it," she said, kneeling by the bed. Sawyer gritted his teeth as she carefully removed his boot. His ankle was already swelling, turning purple. "I need to wrap this," Vivian said. "Do you have bandages?" "Cabinet, top shelf." She found them, along with a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving. She handed him the bottle. "Drink." "I don't need..." "Sawyer, drink the whiskey." He drank. The burn helped distract from the pain as she wrapped his ankle with surprising competence, her hand steady despite the shaking from cold. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked. "My father broke his wrist once. The doctor showed me how to wrap it properly." She tied off the bandage, sat back. "You need to stay off this for at least a week, maybe 2. "Can't, too much work to do." "Then I'll do it." "Vivian, I'll do it," she repeated, firmer. "You taught me how. I can handle the animals, the wood, the water. You just need to rest and let this heal." Sawyer wanted to argue. The thought of being stuck in bed while she did all the work made him feel useless, but the pain in his ankle was already settling into a deep, persistent throb that told him walking was going to be impossible for a while. "All right," he said finally. "Good." She stood, grabbed a blanket. "I'm going back out to finish with the animals. Stay here and don't move." "Yes, ma'am." She stopped at the door, looked back at him. "And Sawyer? Next time you fall, yell for me immediately. Don't try to be tough. It's stupid." Then she was gone, back out into the storm, and Sawyer was left alone with his throbbing ankle and the unsettling realization that his wife was tougher than he'd given her credit for. The next week proved it beyond doubt. Vivian took over everything. She fed the animals, hauled water, split wood, cooked meals, and kept the fire going, all while the storm raged outside and the temperature dropped low enough to freeze water in the basin overnight. Sawyer watched from the bed, frustrated and helpless, as she worked herself to exhaustion. "You need to rest," he said on the third day, watching her sway slightly as she poured coffee. "I'm fine." "You're dead on your feet." "So were you most days. I can handle it." She handed him the coffee, started pulling on her coat. "I need to check on the mare." "Vivian, wait!" But she was already gone. She came back an hour later, covered in snow, shivering so hard she could barely work the buttons on her coat. Sawyer pulled himself up despite the pain in his ankle. "Come here." "I'm fine." "You're freezing. Come here." She did reluctantly. He pulled her down to sit beside him, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and held her until the shivering eased. "You can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "You're going to make yourself sick." "What choice do I have? Someone has to do the work." "Then let some of it wait. The animals are fed, the fire's going, that's enough." "It's not enough. There's wood to split, water to haul, and it can wait until tomorrow, or the next day. The world won't end if we let a few things slide." Vivian was quiet against his shoulder. Then, so softly, he almost didn't hear it. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "That I'll mess something up. That I'll let the fire go out, or forget to feed the chickens, or not bring in enough wood and we'll freeze. That I'll fail, and it'll be my fault." Sawyer tightened his arm around her. "You won't fail. You're doing everything right." "How do you know?" "Because we're both still alive. Because the animals are fine. Because you're out there in the freezing cold every day doing work you never asked for and never complained about." He pulled back to look at her face. "You're not failing, Vivian. You're saving us." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've never been this tired in my life." "I know, and I'm sorry you have to do this alone. You'd do it for me if our positions were reversed." "Yeah, I would." They sat like that for a while, her leaning against him, both of them wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind howl outside. It was the closest they'd been since the wedding, closer than sleeping on opposite sides of the bed, closer than working side by side. And somehow it felt right. "Sawyer?" Vivian said after a while. "Yeah?" "When your ankle heals, will you teach me how to shoot?" That surprised him. "Why?" "Because if something happened to you, really happened, not just a sprained ankle, I'd need to protect myself, protect the homestead. I should know how." She was right. A woman alone out here needed to know how to use a gun. It was just survival. "All right," he said. "When this heals, I'll teach you." "Promise?" "Promise." She settled back against his shoulder, and they stayed like that until the cold forced them to add more wood to the fire. By the end of the second week, Sawyer could put weight on his ankle again. It hurt, and he couldn't walk without limping, but he could manage the lighter chores. Vivian still did most of the heavy work, but now they did it together, her hauling water while he split kindling, her feeding animals while he cooked. They developed a rhythm that worked, that played to both their strengths and covered each other's weaknesses. One evening, after an exhausting day of digging out from another snowfall, they collapsed at the table with coffee and the last of the bread Vivian had baked. "We make a good team," she said, tearing off a piece of bread. "Yeah, we do." "Better than I expected." Sawyer smiled. "What, you thought I'd be terrible to work with?" "I thought we'd drive each other crazy." "We still might." "True." She took a sip of coffee. "But maybe not. Maybe we're just stubborn enough to make this work. Maybe." They fell into silence, but it was comfortable now. The kind of silence that came from being so exhausted that conversation felt like too much effort, but being together felt necessary. That night, when they went to bed, Vivian didn't stay on her side. She curled up against Sawyer's back, her arm draped over his waist, and fell asleep like that, trusting, warm, solid. Sawyer lay there in the darkness, feeling her breathe against his shoulder, and thought about the woman who'd arrived in a storm with a trunk full of broken promises, about how she'd learned to split wood and feed chickens and haul water in freezing cold, about how she'd kept them both alive when he couldn't, about how somewhere along the way, this arrangement had stopped feeling like survival and started feeling like something else entirely. He didn't have a name for it yet. Wasn't sure he wanted one. But lying there with Vivian's arm around him and the wind howling outside, Sawyer realized something that should have terrified him, but somehow didn't. He didn't want her to leave, didn't want this to be temporary, wanted to wake up like this every morning for the rest of his life. Her beside him, both of them alive and warm and together. The thought should have sent him running, should have reminded him of every reason he'd come west alone, every lesson he'd learned about trusting people. But it didn't. Instead, it felt like coming home. Vivian shifted in her sleep, muttering something he couldn't understand, and Sawyer carefully turned to face her. Her hair was spread across the pillow, face soft and unguarded in sleep, one hand still resting on his chest. She was beautiful. He'd known that from the start. But now she was also strong and capable and stubborn and brave, and somehow that made her even more so. "I think I'm in trouble," he whispered to the darkness. Vivian didn't answer, just kept sleeping, her breathing slow and even, completely unaware that Sawyer Hale, who'd spent 3 years building walls to keep everyone out, had just realized those walls had crumbled entirely. And the woman responsible was asleep in his arms, wearing a too-big ring and probably dreaming about chickens. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, like it wasn't sure Wyoming deserved it. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and mud and all the damage winter had hidden. Fences needed repair. The chicken coop roof had partially collapsed under the weight of snow. The vegetable garden was a disaster that would need completely replanting. Sawyer stood looking at it all, his ankle finally healed, and felt something close to contentment. They'd survived. Both of them. The homestead was still standing, the animals were alive, and Vivian was beside him wearing his old work gloves and already planning out loud where to put the tomatoes. "We should expand it," she said, gesturing at the garden plot. "Add another section here for potatoes, maybe beans over there. If we're strategic about it, we could grow enough to sell some in town." "Sell in town," Sawyer repeated. "You planning on making us rich?" "I'm planning on making us stable. There's a difference." She looked at him. "We barely made it through winter. If your ankle had been worse, if the supplies had run out, if anything else had gone wrong, we need a cushion. Money saved up for emergencies." She wasn't wrong. They'd scraped by, but barely. Another disaster and they would have been in real trouble. "All right," he said, "we expand the garden. But you're doing the planning because I'll just plant things randomly and hope for the best." Vivian smiled. "I know. That's why I'm doing it." They worked through March and into April, repairing everything winter had broken and building things they'd never had time to build before. Sawyer taught Vivian how to shoot, starting with tin cans on fence posts, gradually working up to longer distances. She was a terrible shot at first, flinching every time she pulled the trigger, but she kept practicing until she could hit a target more often than not. "Good enough," Sawyer said after she hit 3 cans in a row. "You won't win any competitions, but you can protect yourself if you need to." "That's all I wanted." She lowered the rifle, looked at him. "Thank you for teaching me. You earned it. Kept us alive all winter. Seemed only fair you know how to keep yourself alive, too." Something shifted in her expression. "Sawyer, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you still think of this as temporary, me being here?" The question caught him off guard. They'd been married for months now, had survived winter together, had built something that looked an awful lot like a real partnership, but they'd never actually talked about what came next. "No," he said honestly. "Do you?" "No?" Vivian set down the rifle, brushed dirt off her hands. "I keep waiting for it to feel like a mistake, like we rushed into something we shouldn't have, but it doesn't. It feels like—" She stopped, seemed to struggle for words. "Like home," Sawyer finished. "Yeah, like home." She looked at him, really looked at him. "Is that crazy? We barely knew each other when we got married." "Probably, but it's working anyway." "It is, isn't it?" She smiled, and it was genuine, reaching her eyes. "We're actually making this work." Sawyer reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture felt natural now, easy. Somewhere over the winter, they'd stopped being careful with each other, stopped maintaining polite distance. "Yeah," he said. "We are." They stood there in the spring sunlight, and Sawyer thought about how far they'd both come. The woman who'd been too delicate for frontier life, according to her aunt, was now tougher than half the men in the county. And the man who'd sworn off trusting anyone had a wife he'd trust with his life. It was strange how things worked out sometimes. The first trip to town after winter was always an event, and this year was no different. Sawyer hitched up the wagon, loaded in the supplies they needed to sell, eggs, some preserved vegetables, a few pieces of furniture he'd built during the long winter nights, and helped Vivian up to the seat. She'd made herself a new dress from fabric he'd bought months ago. Something practical but nicer than her work clothes. She'd pinned her hair up properly, and she wore the wedding ring without having to make a fist to keep it on. Sawyer had taken it to the blacksmith over winter and had it sized properly, a fact that had made her cry for reasons he still didn't entirely understand. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but let's go anyway." Town was exactly as they'd left it, small, dusty, full of people who had nothing better to do than gossip. Sawyer felt eyes on them the moment they arrived, saw people whispering behind their hands. "Ignore them," he muttered to Vivian. "I am." But he could see her hands clenched in her lap, see the tension in her shoulders. This was the first time she'd been to town since the wedding, the first time she'd face all these people as his wife, instead of as Garrett's rejected bride. They made their rounds, selling their goods, buying supplies, conducting business with the merchants who were willing to deal with them. Some people were polite, others were coldly professional. A few refused to serve them at all. Sawyer was loading flour into the wagon when Vivian appeared beside him, face flushed. "Mrs. Kern just cut me in line at the dry goods store," she said, voice tight. Looked right at me and stepped in front of me like I was invisible. Ignore her. I did. But then she made a comment to the clerk about certain women lowering the standards of decent society, and She stopped. "I want to punch her, Sawyer. Is that wrong?" "No, but don't do it anyway." "I know. I won't. But I want to." She climbed into the wagon, and they were about to leave when someone called out, "Hale!" Sawyer turned to find Bill Crenshaw standing outside the saloon, already half drunk despite it being barely noon. "Keep driving," Vivian said quietly. Sawyer wanted to, but Crenshaw was walking toward them, and making a scene would only give people more to talk about. "Heard you two got hitched," Crenshaw said, grinning. "That's real romantic. Taking in damaged goods, making an honest woman out of her." "Walk away, Crenshaw," Sawyer said. "Or what? You'll defend your bride's honor?" Crenshaw laughed. "Everyone knows why you married her. Needed a woman to warm your bed, she needed someone desperate enough to take her. It's a fair trade." Sawyer was off the wagon before he consciously decided to move. He had Crenshaw by the shirt front, slammed up against the hitching post, before the man could even blink. "Say another word about my wife, and I'll break your jaw," Sawyer said quietly. Crenshaw's eyes went wide. "Jesus, Hale, I was just,
Just what? Just insulting the woman I married? Just reminding everyone that you left her to die in a storm?" Sawyer tightened his grip. "You're a coward and a drunk, Crenshaw, and if you come near my property, or my wife again, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you are." He let go, and Crenshaw stumbled back, face red. "You're crazy," Crenshaw muttered. "Yeah, remember that." Sawyer climbed back into the wagon, picked up the reins, and drove out of town without looking back. They were a mile down the road before Vivian spoke. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "He's not worth it. None of them are." "Maybe not, but you are." Vivian was quiet. Then she reached over and took his hand, rough, calloused, still shaking slightly from adrenaline, and held it. "Thank you," she said. They rode the rest of the way home in silence, hands clasped, and Sawyer thought about how defending Vivian had felt as natural as breathing, how the thought of anyone hurting her made him want to break things, how somewhere along the way this arrangement had become something real. That night, after dinner, Vivian was unusually quiet. She sat by the fire, mending clothes, but her mind was clearly somewhere else. "What are you thinking about?" Sawyer asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then, "Do you regret it? Marrying me?" "What? No. Why would you ask that?" "Because I've made your life harder. The people in town, the gossip, the way they treat you now, that's because of me. That's because they're small-minded idiots, not because of you. But if you'd never found me in that storm, if you just kept riding, then you'd be dead, and I'd still be alone, and neither of us would be better off." Sawyer set down the harness he'd been working on. "Vivian, look at me." She did, eyes bright. "I don't regret marrying you. I don't regret any of it. Yeah, people talk. Yeah, some of them treat us like we're scandalous, but I don't care about them. I care about this." He gestured around the cabin at the life they'd built. "I care about us. And if choosing you means dealing with Adelaide Kern's judgment and Bill Crenshaw's insults, then I'll deal with it, gladly." Vivian's eyes were wet now. "I love you." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and true.
Sawyer felt his chest tighten. He'd known, somewhere deep down, that what he felt for her had gone beyond partnership or friendship or even affection. But hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way that scared him. Because loving someone meant they could hurt you, meant giving them power to destroy everything you'd built. He'd learned that lesson hard in Missouri, and he'd spent 3 years making sure he'd never have to learn it again. But this was different. Vivian was different.
"I love you too," he said, and it felt like jumping off a cliff. "I think I have for a while now. I was just too stubborn to admit it." Vivian set down her mending, crossed the room, and kissed him. It wasn't their first kiss. They'd exchanged a brief, awkward peck after the wedding ceremony. But this was different. This was real. This was a promise, and a claim, and a choice, all wrapped into one. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sawyer cupped her face in his hands. "I'm not good at this," he said, "at feelings and words and all the things I'm supposed to say." "I don't need words." Vivian's hands covered his. "I need you, just as you are. That's enough." That night, they didn't sleep on opposite sides of the bed. They didn't maintain careful distance or pretend to be less than what they were. They were husband and wife, in every sense of the word, and for the first time since they'd married, it felt completely right. Summer brought its own challenges. The garden Vivian had so carefully planned flourished, producing more vegetables than they could eat. They started selling at the farmer's market that set up in town every Saturday. Vivian behind the table, charming customers and negotiating prices, while Sawyer hauled produce and tried not to look like he wanted to punch the people who still whispered about them. The money helped. By July, they had enough saved to buy lumber for an actual barn, replacing the lean-to that barely kept the horse dry. Sawyer designed it, but Vivian helped build it, working beside him in the summer heat, her hands developing new calluses on top of old ones. "You're going to be stronger than me soon," Sawyer said one evening, watching her lift a beam he would have struggled with months ago. "I already am," Vivian shot back, grinning. She probably wasn't wrong. Frontier life had transformed her completely. The soft-handed Boston lady was gone, replaced by a woman who could split wood, shoot straight, haggle with merchants, and build a barn without breaking a sweat. Sawyer had never been more attracted to anyone in his life. In August, a letter arrived. Vivian brought it in from the mailbox they'd installed at the road, a luxury they'd only recently been able to afford. She stood in the doorway holding it like it might explode. "It's from my aunt," she said. Sawyer looked up from the table where he'd been sketching plans for expanding the chicken coop. "You wrote to her?" "Months ago, right after we got married. I thought she should know I was alive at least." Vivian turned the envelope over in her hands. "I didn't expect her to respond." "You gonna open it?" She did slowly, unfolding the single page inside. Her eyes scanned the contents, and Sawyer watched her face go through a dozen emotions: surprise, anger, something that might have been hurt. "She says she's glad I found a husband, even if he's merely a homesteader." Vivian's voice was flat. "She says perhaps frontier life will teach me the humility I clearly lacked when I left Boston, and she hopes I've learned my lesson about reaching above my station." Sawyer felt anger spike hot in his chest. "Sounds like a lovely woman. She is exactly what I left Boston to escape." Vivian folded the letter, walked to the stove, and fed it to the fire. They both watched it burn. "You all right?" Sawyer asked. "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." Vivian turned to face him. "Because she's wrong. About all of it. Marrying you wasn't settling. Building this life wasn't a lesson in humility. It was the best decision I ever made. Even with the chickens?" That made her laugh. "Even with the chickens." She crossed to him, settled into his lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sawyer wrapped his arms around her, feeling the solid warmth of her, the realness of her. "I spent my whole life trying to be what other people wanted," Vivian said quietly. "Proper, polite, appropriate. And it made me miserable. Coming west was supposed to be about finding freedom, but I just ended up chasing another man's expectations." She pulled back to look at him. "Then I met you, and you never asked me to be anything but myself, even when myself was terrible at feeding chickens. You're still terrible at feeding chickens. I know, but you love me anyway." "Yeah, I do."
They sat there as the summer evening faded into night, and Sawyer thought about how strange life was. How the worst thing that had ever happened to Vivian, being abandoned in a storm, had led her to the best thing. How his determination to live alone had been shattered by the one person he couldn't turn away. How sometimes the things that broke you were the same things that put you back together, just in a different shape. Fall came, and with it, a surprise visitor. Sawyer was working on the barn roof when he saw the rider approaching, a well-dressed man on an expensive horse, looking completely out of place against the rough Wyoming landscape. Thomas Garrett. Sawyer climbed down from the roof slowly, wiping his hands on his pants, watching Garrett approach. Vivian came out of the cabin, saw who it was, and her whole body went rigid. "What do you want?" Sawyer called out before Garrett could even dismount. "Just to talk." Garrett swung down from his horse, tied it to the post. "I heard you two got married. Thought I should pay my respects." "Your respects aren't wanted." "Nevertheless." Garrett looked around the property, the new barn, the expanded garden, the cabin with its fresh chinking. "You've done well for yourselves. I'm impressed." "We don't need your approval," Vivian said. Her voice was steady, but Sawyer could see her hands clenched at her sides. "I'm not offering approval. I'm offering an apology." That surprised both of them into silence. Garrett took off his hat, turned it in his hands. "What I did was wrong. The way I treated you, Mrs. Hale, was inexcusable. I let my own ambitions and prejudices dictate my actions, and you nearly died because of it." "Why are you here?" Vivian asked. "Why now?" "Because my land deal fell through anyway. The man I was trying to impress turned out to be a fraud. I lost a significant amount of money, and my reputation took a hit." Garrett's smile was bitter. "Turns out being settled and respectable doesn't mean much when the person judging you is a con artist." "So you came here for what? Sympathy?" Sawyer stepped closer to Vivian, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on Garrett. "No. I came to tell you I was wrong about you, Mrs. Hale. I thought you'd be a problem because you had intelligence and opinions. Turns out those are exactly the qualities a man should value in a wife." He looked at Sawyer. "You're a lucky man, Hale." "I know. Treat her well." "I do." Garrett nodded, put his hat back on. "Then I suppose there's nothing more to say. I'll leave you to your life. It seems you've built a good one." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Sawyer and Vivian standing in the yard, both slightly stunned. "Did that just happen?" Vivian asked. "I think so." "He apologized." "Yeah. I didn't think he was capable of that." "Maybe he's not. Maybe he just wanted to feel better about himself." Sawyer looked at her. "Does it change anything? Him apologizing?" Vivian thought about it. "No, he could apologize 1,000 times and it wouldn't change what he did. But," she paused, "it does feel like closure, like that chapter is finally finished." "Good. Because I'm tired of him being part of our story." "Me too." Vivian took his hand. "Let's write a better one." They did. Through fall and into the next winter, they built and planned and dreamed. They talked about adding more cattle, about building a second room onto the cabin, about maybe, someday, starting a family. The town slowly came around. Not everyone, not Adelaide Kern and her circle of judgment, but enough people that doing business became easier. The farmers' market customers started asking for Vivian specifically, praising her vegetables and her fair prices. Merchants who'd once refused to serve them now greeted them politely. It wasn't acceptance, exactly, but it was better than hostility. On their first anniversary, Sawyer took Vivian to the ridge overlooking their property. From up there, you could see everything they'd built: the cabin, the barn, the fields, the fence line stretching into the distance. "You see that?" Sawyer pointed to the land below. "Our homestead? Our future." He turned to her. "Everything we've built, everything we're going to build, it's ours. Not because some government paper says so or because we proved up on a claim, but because we worked for it together." Vivian leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "A year ago, I was drowning in mud in a storm," she said, "abandoned, alone, certain I was going to die. And now you're here. Now I'm home." She looked up at him. "You gave me that. A home. A real one." "We gave each other that," Sawyer corrected. "I was just existing before you showed up.
Going through the motions, you made it into a life worth living.
They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that had no names, and Sawyer thought about the journey that had brought them here. The storm, the rescue, the awkward wedding, the hard winter. All of it leading to this moment, standing on a ridge overlooking land they'd transformed together. People talked about love like it was supposed to be easy, like finding the right person meant everything would fall into place without effort. But Sawyer knew better. Love wasn't easy. It was hard work and compromise and learning to trust someone even when every instinct said not to. It was choosing to stay when leaving would be simpler. It was building something together, piece by piece, even when you had no idea what you were doing. And it was worth it. Every difficult moment, every challenge, every time they'd stumbled and had to figure out how to keep going, it was all worth it for this.
I love you, he said, because the words still felt new enough to be worth saying out loud. I love you too, Vivian replied, even when you're being stubborn, especially when I'm being stubborn. She laughed, and the sound carried across the ridge, across the land they'd claimed and tamed and made theirs. This was what home felt like, Sawyer realized. Not a place, not four walls and a roof, but this, standing beside someone who knew all your broken pieces and chose to stay anyway. Someone who'd survived storms with you and come out stronger on the other side. Someone who'd started as a stranger in the mud and become the person you couldn't imagine living without. The storm that had brought them together was long over. But what they'd built from it, the life, the love, the partnership, that was just beginning. And Sawyer Hale, who'd spent 3 years building walls to keep everyone out, finally understood that the strongest thing he'd ever built wasn't a fence or a barn or a homestead claim.
Oh, never mind.
It was a marriage, a real one, with a woman who was brave enough to love him back. Together, they walked down from the ridge as the stars came out, heading toward the cabin where smoke rose from the chimney and lamplight glowed warm in the windows, heading home. Not because they had to, but because they chose to, every single day.
Is that a Sam? There's no way, right?
Or a destroyer.
There's a good view from one of the naval helicopters.
No, I think that's just a floating platform, actually.
And they put Subway Surfers in the side? That's what I'm saying.
Reed Wiseman reporting.
I'm starting to lose
4
interest.
green crew members, meaning they're all in excellent shape.
That's my Family Guy clips.
We can reenact Family Guy right now, Ben. Here, you start. You'll be Peter, I'll be Lois, okay? Man, what the fuck, man?
Integrity Houston 4, Star Beacon and radio.
You left me out to dry, bro.
Wait, what'd you say? What'd you say?
Star Beacon is in 406, and we're firing
I wasn't
for you now.
listening.
Bro.
See the beacon
Dude.
on.
Dude, I was like, we can be the Family Guy clip. Let's do one right now. You be Peter, I be Lois. And then you just didn't say anything.
You may run into trouble with the radio.
That clip, that Family Guy clip was called the carbon monoxide poisoning.
We're also powering up the saxophone now.
Pina, the horse is here. Oh, Pina.
So Integrity is in great shape, and as the crew continues its post-splashdown timelined activities on board, Reed Wiseman once again reporting that all 4 crew members are in excellent shape. And we have 5 inflated airbags to maintain an upright.
Wait, they're back? Yep.
So that the reaction, the recovery team can now begin a slow approach to the vehicle. Meanwhile, here in the flight control room, Entry Flight Director Rick Henfling is polling his team of flight control